because it would be like my half hour in the evenings that I had to spend, I'd hop on, play Diablo 2 with randos, and made some weird internet friends who knows, were probably creeps. Hard to say,
Hard to say.
You're like, I'm 12. And they're like, me too.
Yeah, me too.
Butterscotch.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 463 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam. I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm wearing pink.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry and fashion sometimes. Not much about it other than colors, but that's a big part of it, I feel.
As far as we go.
It's one of the biggest things.
Yeah. As I look around, each of us is just wearing a solid color shirt right now. So I think that's
tracks.
Fashion.
That's just fashion.
Also, fashion, baby.
Also, speaking of the color pink, so I started watching the Fallout TV show.
Wait, let me get through the intro.
Okay,
hold on. Today's April 12th, 2024. There's going to be profanity in this show. Also, thanks to our supporters at moneygrab.bscotch.net. All right, carry on.
The color pink. So the new Fallout show just came out. We're going to talk about it until we've most of us have watched it and stuff. But it's set kind of 1950s, right? As 1950s vibe, but then of course the idea is time is kind of frozen in the 50s because of all the nuclear war that happens, right? So in the first episode, one of the characters calls somebody a pinko, and which I know from hearing that as a kid in movies and stuff, it's usually followed by communist or something, So I know it's an old timey insult about
Pinko
something
is?
to do. Yeah, pinko is something to do with communist. So I was like, actually, what is this actually? So then I just Googled it to see what this thing was, and it was embarrassing because it literally is just a reference to the color pink, because pink is a lighter shade of red, and red is the whole Red Scare in the 50s and stuff, And that's it. That was the whole thing. And
so
I was
It's kind of creative though, right? It's like telling somebody a diet communist, right?
Yeah,
where they're
right. Communist, yeah.
Communist at home. Right?
Yeah, I guess.
You're not quite fully committed, but you're kind of sort of there.
Pinko.
But
It's weird. It's weird though, because it's normally with insults, people really go for it, right? And this one is it's an insult, but they're acknowledging that you're not actually fully there.
Yeah, I don't really get what it's, but it feels like one of those kinds of insults that doesn't.
That's weird.
That can't affect its target audience, the person you're trying to insult, right? Because think of if somebody called me a beta male, right? I'd be I don't care about this concept. That doesn't mean anything to me. I can't receive it as an insult, right? It doesn't work.
Well, Adam,
right?
I mean, much like,
but I feel
that's the thing.
Sure. I think it's actually because I'm a soy boy, So
oh yeah,
I'm immune to such things. But it feels like one of those things where it's that was a whole thing, in that era, right? Of this whole anti-communist thing, whatever. And they had all these kinds of quote unquote slurs, right, for people who are on that side of a political spectrum. But is it offensive if you're actually on that side of if I was a communist and I was called a pinko, would I be offended?
Well, you'd be insulted because you're no, I'm full red.
I'm a reddo.
I'm a reddo.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but I think much like we talk about, game reviews on Steam or whatever, right? The insult it often says far more about the person doing the insulting than it is about the person being insulted.
Yeah,
very correct.
So this is it just reveals the speaker's worldview and what they think is upsetting or offensive, regardless of whether.
That's what makes me so because that's actually what makes me mad about those things is the person's when a person uses an insult like that, that isn't even insulting because you're saying it just is it's reflective of their own insane.
It's insulting how uninsulting it is,
but also how self-satisfied they are in it. When they make the insult, they feel like they've accomplished something.
They're got him.
And there's a smugness. Yeah, exactly.
But that
is unearned, and that's what makes me mad, where I'm you didn't actually accomplish anything. The fact that you think you did and are so self-satisfied about it, that's what actually makes me angry.
That's the real insult.
Well, but it's
as long as you're mad, though.
Right? Because, again, if someone calls you a beta
it should
male,
be.
It's just a they're just self-insulting.
But they don't. But they don't know that they are. That's why.
I know, but that's why you become smug. You absorb their smugness, and you say, "I am."
I think I'm just mad when they should be embarrassed and aren't. That's really what it is. You know, it's like you should
but
be
all they
embarrassed
see
by your
is
stupid ideas.
But all they see is that you're mad, you know, and they're like, "Got him." And they don't realize that you're just mad at how dumb they are,
and how much they don't know that they're dumb, and how
it's upsetting, you know. But hang in there,
you know? Yeah,
The
struggle.
All right. Well. So this week we've been doing tons of stuff in the studio. We are wrapping up lots of loose ends with stuff in Crashlands 2. We're forging ahead on a whole bunch of new content. So much so that you know what, we're just gonna sit tight on talking about it for now because we do have some news that will be coming in within like a couple of episodes or something.
A few episodes. Yeah.
But instead, in today's episode, we're just gonna go through some questions. I think because we didn't answer any last time. You know, we are wildly consistent in how inconsistent we are in getting to questions on episodes. So let's get into it. Our highest upvoted question from podcast.bscotch.net comes from Retro Banana Man NL, who says, "Heyo, what equipment are you guys using to record the podcast?" Now, before we answer, I want to say this sounds like it's going to a question with a brief answer, but for some reason, I feel like it won't be.
Every time
Let's get into it.
But I want to first say, I think you're very wrong in that initial assumption because anytime anybody wants to know about equipment and tech stuff, like gear stuff, they don't want short. They're not looking for short answers. The kind of person who asked that question is like,
they don't know why.
They want to know what the gear is, you know? And I've never heard in my life somebody ask somebody else about gear and not get the longest answer list in the universe, right?
Yeah.
Which is actually funny because my answer to this is actually very short, which is a Rode Podcaster is my microphone, which I like, I guess. Got nothing against it. Works fine. I got an arm to kind of keep it in my face, you know?
Same.
And then we all use Audacity to record it. And that's it for me.
Same story, actually, across the board.
Yeah. Because that's to me, the irony is funny because that's the opposite, which is like, I actually don't care about my podcasting setup, except that it works fine.
Yep.
Well, you kind of do. Because, for example, you've also got sound panels on the wall behind you for sound dampening.
Well, I got yelled at enough by Patrick, from Fat Bard, who does our editing, who was like, when we moved indoors, or not indoors, I guess we were always indoors. We moved to work from home and didn't have our nice, setup where we were all working. Then there was like 6 months, or like the first 6 months or something like that, where I was recording from home. And week after week, Patrick would just be like, "Your audio sounds like shit. You need to get some sound down." And he didn't say that literally. He was very polite about it,
but insistent.
But it is what he was saying.
But the crazy thing that I've learned about audio recording stuff is that it has so much more to do with the space you're in and how you are using your microphone than what microphone you're using. Right? Yeah, of course, there's shitty microphones. No doubt about it.
Above a certain margin, yeah.
Yeah, but if you have like even just like a decent microphone, but then you like set it on your desk and it's like 2 feet away from your face, then it's just gonna sound like shit because you have to turn the volume way up so that it picks your voice up, which means it also just picks up every other thing in the room, right? And like so you need the microphone. It also means your
gain's gonna be high, so it's just like everything's being amplified. Sounds like shit because we just got help by Patrick, who basically helped us figure out how to get everything set up so that when he goes and does his editing pass afterwards, that he's not too angry about it. It was kind of like that. That's my target. Is like if Patrick isn't that angry, then we probably have a decent sound setup.
Yeah, medium angry, no problem.
Yeah,
very angry, too much.
So much of it was like we all got decent microphones, just at least decent. And mine is, I'm looking right now. Mine is like 1 inch in front of my lips, right? And I've got one of those big like
pop filter.
A fuzzball pop filter on it, to keep it from getting too horrible. So
it's not a pop filter. Pop filter is like the screen.
That's like the screen, yeah. But it's like the little snow cone head, whatever,
Yeah.
So I got that, so that way I can talk like right into it. And I have a little script I run before the podcast starts that sets my microphone volume down to a particular level where the gain isn't too high and so on. Like that, basically, it's the same level every single time for every podcast episode, right? And it was one of those ones where, again, it was like Patrick was like, I want to see, like, Patrick was like, the smaller the waveform is, the better, actually. Because he's like, because if it blows out and goes towards the max, that's when you start losing all the quality and all that kind of stuff, you know? So he's like, if you actually listen to the recording raw, I'm like, when I listen, I'm like, this isn't even, I can barely hear this.
It's barely audible. You know? But like so he'll use I think it's called a compression algorithm in Audacity or like in similar software that kind of like evens out the audio levels, because, you know, in some cases, if you're speaking normally, but then you do like a really loud laugh or something, then if you just maintain the differences between those sounds, then when you're listening to it just raw, it's real quiet and then suddenly way too fucking loud, right? Yeah. And so you want to kind of normalize the waveform, but like Adam was saying, if you've got your gain set on your mic so that it's already blown out, so that like it's already hitting the edges of the
actually when you blow out, that's kind of
right? Yeah. So it's, you know, people get really kind of fixated on like what tools you're using, but your mic has to be close to you. Yeah, your mic's got to be close to your mouth. It's got to be a directional mic. Mm-hmm. You need a room that doesn't have a ton of hard surfaces, or at the very least has enough sort of sound dampening surfaces. So like, you know, Adam and I in our offices, we put up these sound panels on the wall, which they're pretty cheap, but they're basically like a rectangular wooden frame with some fabric over it, and then they're kind of just stuffed with like cotton or something.
Well, it's actually it's like heavy insulation.
So some kind of insulation.
If you lift them off the wall, they're what are they like? They're like 2 by 4 feet each or something like that. Mm-hmm. If you lift them off the wall, they're not like heavy, but they're weighty. You know, you can feel. Yeah, they're substantial.
Yeah, and so like, and you don't need like to be in a padded room. You just need enough absorbent surfaces
in the right places.
Yeah. It's like in corners of the room or, you know, stuff like that. And something that a lot of people don't know, when you hear, say, like a reporter who is traveling abroad, right? How is it that they have like studio level audio quality when they're recording their narrations and stuff?
They're in a closet.
Well, they're in a closet. They go in the closet or they go under like a duvet cover in a hotel. Right. So they're just like in a bed under the covers, and they just have not that great of a mic, but having the mic be positioned well, having the gain properly set, and being in a sound dampened space does so much for the audio quality. Everything else is kind of just details at that point.
Yeah, it is one of those things. It's like once you get above the space and how you're using stuff, like you can still get a significant improvements to fidelity as you keep going up, right? Mm-hmm. It's just that those don't matter if the space isn't there, and if the space is, and if you're using it properly, the space is there, then you already get 80% of the way to like it's really good quality.
Of a Maslow's without a hierarchy, right? Of podcasting, which is like your basic needs need to be met in terms of the space being soft and the mic being close to your face and the gain being low. If you're not meeting those, then don't even worry about the mic yet, because you got.
And also, speaking of gains, make sure whatever you're using to record and to talk to each other doesn't fuck with your gain automatically, because that's the biggest struggle we've run into. Is there's only one piece of software we've managed to be able to use because we're all independently recording. So there's things like Riverside FM and a few other similar kinds of things these days where everybody can get online, talk to each other over video call, and have it be recorded at the same time. So it's already in sync and all that kind of stuff, right? Those kinds of things exist. We haven't had much luck using them. So we still do it the way we're each independently recording our own Audacity track, right? And then we just use Discord to actually like hang out with each other and talk while we're doing the podcast. We tried using lots of other stuff to get some lower latency, to try to like, because also Discord is a huge resource hog, you know, and the net effect was that almost everything we used, or maybe even everything we used,
I think everything
automatically adjusts your microphone volume, like at the system level, right?
In a bad way.
Yeah. To try to accommodate to try to accommodate changes in volume while you're talking. So which is good for the experience if you're not trying to record it, because now everybody's like volume levels are being kind of automatically fixed without, you know, right? But since it actually is doing it to your microphone, it means that the volume in your recording is constantly changing, right? Mm-hmm. Which is really bad. And so Discord is literally the only thing that we've been able to use for us to actually do the podcast separate from recording the podcast that doesn't do that.
Yeah. And you can adjust your audio input volume and stuff through Discord, but it's applied after the fact. It's not applied at the system level to the microphone itself, you know.
So it only happens well, that's the cool thing, right? Because like right now I'm talking and Discord is like capturing my microphone, right? It's applying noise cancellation. It's doing all kinds of stuff to the audio that's coming into Discord. But like you're saying, it happens once it hits Discord, and it's not doing anything to my mic.
It's not changing what your mic is doing.
Yeah, Audacity is also listening to my mic and just, writing everything to disk as it comes in, right? And it's not touching it at all. It's just taking it raw. And so the same microphone, the same input goes into these two different systems for two different purposes, and it works great. The problem is these fucking systems are like, we're in charge of your microphone volume now, And again, they all do it, and you can't tell them to stop. You can't make them stop doing it. It's so frustrating.
Yeah. So software choice is pretty important. Try to find something that doesn't mess with your mic. But yeah, I mean, getting pretty good sounding audio is actually not that hard. It's just that people tend to focus on the wrong things, right? Just like, what is my mic? Not where is my mic or how is my mic?
I do sometimes hear people who have like. But I do sometimes hear audio on occasion, like in a podcast or something, where I can hear the quality of the microphone too, because everything else is good. They've got their space up and everything, right? Because also, if you're in a poorly set up space, a good microphone is going to fail way worse actually than a bad microphone, because they're designed to have your face in them and that kind of thing, right? But every once in a while, I hear somebody who's actually got like a good setup and one of those fancy ass microphones, the high end stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And I hear it and I'm like, ooh, like this is the good stuff. And every once in a while I'm like, oh, I kind of want that, but to do that though, that's where now you're in gear territory.
That's where you need a room. Like you need a room that's set up for that, and you want like everything.
And you're gonna have like $1,000 of equipment, to like,
this is like it's the difference between like $200, which is probably how much each of us have in equipment.
Yeah, probably
maybe less than that, maybe 150 or something.
I think the Rode podcasters are on the more expensive end for use. They're like the kind of the highest end of the USB mics, or at least were when we got them. I think they're like $250 or something like that.
But like the difference between what we've got and then like if you wanted to go to some next level, that's like
it's
tens of thousands of dollars.
And then you're doing like aux cables, and you're going in through like an analog port. Like there's all kind of like you just have a new set of problems now. And I want to be able just to plug a USB into my computer and be done with it, right?
Yeah, which is kind of what we had back when we had our office. Like we had a room that had a lot of extra sound paneling in it. A lot. And we were using a little bit better microphones and stuff.
And it was cool. Like when you go into that room, like
you could feel the sound go down.
Feel it. Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, because like outside of that room, there would be like humming of air conditioners, and you could kind of hear like chatter out in the hallways and stuff, because we were in a sort of like like an office building with other offices, right? And then you'd go to that room and just quiet. Yeah. Very cool. Very hard to achieve independently in your own home, like in each person's own home, right? Because your house space is, it's used for so many other things too. So, so just focus on that stuff. And if you're looking to like start your own podcast, or even just do some like audio recording work, maybe for YouTube videos or something like that, if you just do some of those steps, then you get really good.
Well, and I'll also
results.
Say, outside of podcasting, if you talk to people using a microphone ever, you should also do this, because
if you can do it, because
because like, I think that's the point, is like it doesn't take much, like because even there's stuff like I think it's hard to get a good enough microphone below like $50, right?
So but it's pretty. Like the one I use for like all of our usual stuff is it's called an Antlion. And you just attach it to your headset, because I don't like having the podcast mic in my face all the time. And also doing art is a whole different thing from the programming side, where like I have a lot of tools. There's a lot of hardware going on my desktop that needs to move around depending on what I'm doing, right? The tablet, the keyboard are just swinging around like all the time during the day, depending on what kind of task I'm up to. And so having a thing in your face is just didn't work for me. So I found that Antlion microphone that I just attached to my headset, and
it's very good.
Which is still in your face, but it's less.
It's attached to your face. It's not in space in front of you.
It's less intrusive about it.
Yeah. So, and that works. That for me has worked really well as far as being a like high enough quality that the fact that it's like right in your face, lets it do certain things a little bit better. But even still, like if I have that thing on, if there's a dog barking in the next room or something like that, you're going to hear the whole dog bark, as opposed to like this microphone is very directionally coned, so it just has a lot more protection against that kind of external nonsense than.
Sam, you're using a mic with an actual aux out.
This is the old one from the office. Yeah. I stole this when we moved out.
Yeah, I've got one of the. I got one of those in the basement too that I keep on thinking about hooking up, and I'm like, oh, I just don't want to deal with the aux cables and
Yeah, I mean, I got the box. I took the box with me. It's the thing. So you have a microphone, but you got no box to plug it into. You have to figure that whole problem out.
It's just it's a whole fucking thing.
Yeah, it can get complicated.
Yeah, but
once you start going outside of USB mics.
Yeah, but the point being though is especially if you work from home, it's worth upgrading your audio setup because like we're saying, it actually doesn't take as much as unless you want to be a gearhead about it and spend $1,000, right? You mostly just need a decent mic and to figure out how to get it right in front of your face, right? And it doesn't have to be an expensive, like a really expensive mic. It doesn't have like you can a pretty small investment is an enormous upgrade over defaults of things or over like an actual shitty thing, right? And anybody who has to listen to you talk on the internet is going to be very happy.
They'll be so appreciative.
Yeah.
And you can even do stuff like if you're in a room that has a lot of hardwood floors, get a rug.
Yeah,
just get a rug.
The impact is enormous. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, and it'll make the room look nicer, and it'll do some sound dampening. One thing you should never do though, is use speakers and have your mic near your speakers because oh my fucking god, there's one guy in my WoW guild on the raid team who claims that headphones of every sort hurt his head. He cannot wear headphones under any circumstance.
Or earbuds or anything.
Yeah. Nothing. He only uses speakers, and he's got a mic that like sits on his desk near his speakers. And whenever he talks, nobody else can say a thing. And like if he wants to interrupt somebody while they're speaking, he just can because as soon as he cues that mic, the person just gets immediately speech jammed and can't think or do anything. Yeah, and honestly, he just gets to just blast.
That person needs to be kicked out of your guild because that's
we've harassed him a lot about it, and so there's ways, and you can even do stuff in Discord. Like Discord has an option where like if you have push to talk, you can make it so you can designate people as I can't remember what the term is in Discord, but when they're speaking, then other people get muted. Like you can do that. So, so there's ways, but just don't do that.
Just don't do that.
It's very disruptive.
Well, I think, but it's another good point too, though, is like if you're, again, even if you just talk to people, certainly for a podcast, but even if you're just talking to people on the internet, the sound should be going right into your ear holes somehow. However you want to make that happen, like rather than having a speaker, whether it's in your, again, it doesn't have to be high quality stuff to still get the job done. And you'll solve so many problems by not having speakers that are just blasting into your shitty microphone when you're trying to like have a conversation with somebody else.
Yeah. So you'll solve a lot of technical and relationship problems.
Mostly social problems.
All right. Next question comes from Lexzap, who says, I am curious about your introduction to the world of video games. What were your favorite games and or gaming consoles when you were kids? Love the podcast. Thanks for everything.
Man, I remember playing Word Munchers on that Macintosh computer.
Word Munchers, baby.
Oregon Trail. Hell of a game.
I think I was more of a Number Munchers guy, but also there was Super Munchers, which I think kind of like it's been long enough I can't really remember the distinction between because there was Word Munchers, Number Munchers, and Super Munchers, which that's when they gave you like the cape. But I can't remember if that was a word one only or if that was like both. I don't remember what that was.
Math Blasters?
Math Blast. Yeah. So yeah, most of the early games we play. So I think we probably mentioned this before on the podcast, but we were largely disallowed from engaging with video games growing up, except under special circumstances. So we had limited screen time. So we would have, I think we had like 30 minutes of screen time a day. And we could bank it, and like watch a movie on the weekends or whatever, but mostly our parents just threw us out the door and they were like, go into the woods. And then that was kind of what we did growing up.
Go into the woods and try not to die.
Yeah. So we had Game Boys for road trips, mostly to just keep us quiet. And so, so we had stuff like Kirby's Dream Land and Tetris and Jurassic Park on the Game Boy.
Yeah, you guys remember that? Hard as shit.
Yeah, there were some real bangers back then.
And we had that one cartridge that was like is it Galaxy? Galaga Galaxon, whatever.
Is it Galaxy?
It might be two different games. I can't remember, but it was a cartridge that had like 3 of those old arcade games in it, right? And I played the
Centipede.
And I played the shit out of that one. Like I absolutely love that one.
Yeah.
So we kind of grew up on that stuff, but it was in a very limited capacity. I do remember like going to friends' houses and just going nuts because all my friends had video game consoles, and we didn't have
we didn't have any consoles in the house until high school, where we had a PS2, I think.
PS2 was the first one we got. Yeah,
we had an N64 at Dad's house with we played Pod Racer on there.
So I was in 8th grade at that time. So I was freshman in high school.
Yeah. So for me, I didn't have any games in any of my houses until high school.
Classic third child. They were like, whatever. By the time,
just do whatever you want. Who cares?
Whatever. The other two probably developed enough. We can contaminate a third one. Yeah, I mean, it's weird because I think because of our like at least in my kind of reflection on this, I feel like the amount of distance that I had from video games isn't like, I wasn't just steeped in them growing up. They kind of maintained this sort of like mystique to me where whenever I got to play one, I was just like, oh, and I just locked into it, and I'm pretty sure that I had some friends growing up who I was only friends with because they had like Zelda on the Game Boy or something, and they would let me play it when I went to their house or something. So yeah, I don't know. It's like in high school, I worked at a grocery store and ended up like buying some cheap computer parts and put together a gaming early 2000s. I'm putting gaming PC in quotes here. It was like, CRT monitor, like 256 megabytes of RAM or whatever the fuck back then. And
bought with lots of minimum wage labor as a teen, So like, it's not.
It was the best I could throw together. But, like once I had that in my room bought with my own money, then I kind of went all in on all kinds of gaming shit.
And we had a family PC in middle school.
So we had StarCraft on that.
StarCraft and Diablo. I remember playing a lot of them.
Diablo.
And that was also in Half-Life. Because Diablo 2 was, I think, my first it was my first PC. It was my first serious game, I would say, besides just
I think where you really put some time into it.
Yeah, because it would be like my half hour in the evenings that I had to spend. I'd hop on, play Diablo 2 with randos, and made some weird internet friends who knows were probably creeps. Hard to say,
Hard to say.
It was a different time. We just talk to anybody, and nobody was really paying much attention and thought about it that much.
Mm-hmm. You're like, I'm 12, and they're like, me too.
Yeah, me too. So Diablo 2 was like the one that like really kind of got me first, I think. But then still, my favorite game from my younger years was the OG Half-Life, which that's what made me care about gaming. And I'm not, honestly, I'm just not a big gamer really, but that was the game that made me that brought me into the gaming space as a gamer to the extent that I'm in there, right? Where I was like, when Half-Life 2 got announced and was going to come out when I was in college, I was so fucking jazzed. It was like, and then I think if I remember correctly, it got delayed for a bit and stuff. And so I'd pre-ordered it and I was like waiting for it to come, and I saved the box, the whole, I was a fan of that franchise and of that game, and I was so excited. Like Portal, fucking love it. It was like there was that era there where I did actually play a lot of games in college, and it was like the free stuff and then like the indie things that were coming onto Steam at the time, and that was really like the heyday of my own gaming days. Was like the 2004 onset of Steam era for the next 4 years. And then after that,
you were very much a Steam guy.
Yeah,
especially at that time.
I played when the games were first coming to Steam. There weren't that many, right? And I bought every game.
They were all good.
They were all great.
Bangers.
You remember Ragdoll Kung Fu, one of the early weird indie titles? I bought everything for the first years of Steam being out.
Which sounds insane now, but bear in mind that there was
dozens of games in total. Yeah, it wasn't that much.
Yeah. If you bought every game coming out on Steam now, you'd be spending $10,000 a day probably.
Yeah, what was it like? Yeah, and the early humble bundles too. I bought all of because it was so cheap, right? And now it's just saturated, and there's too much of everything, and it's all collectible.
It's hard. It's hard to keep up.
A game I remember playing. There's two games I remember playing a lot of. One of which I don't hear anybody ever talk about, which is Azure Dreams on the Game Boy.
Yeah,
which I love.
I never heard about it before or since.
It's I think you essentially get a monster, and then you go into this tower because your dad disappeared into the tower, and the town you're in is all fucked up and not doing well. And basically, you're essentially you go into this tower, you're bringing treasures and stuff back, and you're rebuilding the town. you find more interesting monsters in there that you kind of take with you, and then climb to the top. And spoiler, this game's old as fuck. Your dad is at the top. He's I don't remember why.
You ruined it.
Well, yeah, I don't remember why he's up there.
For some reason he's up there.
For some reason,
what I think
involved.
is that game. That game really stuck with me for two reasons. One is what you said, Sam, which is I've never heard anybody else talk about it.
Yeah,
before or since. But the other thing is, it actually, now that you're describing it, it makes me think a lot about the struggles we had with Crashlands, which was trying to describe it, right? Because I remember when you first played it, you're like, this game is so cool, and you were convincing me to play it, and you were like, well, it's kind of like Pokemon. And I was like, oh, so like you're capturing and like pet battling. You're like, well, no, it's like
it's a roguelike,
kind
actually.
of, but your pets like come with you, right? And they're like they're traveling with you, and they do stuff, and it's also kind of
rejuvenating this town for some reason.
Yeah, but also, like each time you're defeated, I think it was like each time you're defeated the tower, you go back to the town and you can like build up the town. So it's got, like you said, it's got like almost like that rogue legacy building. It has so many cool elements in it, and they were all executed really well to my recollection, anyways, to my 12-year-old brain or whatever. But yeah, like I don't know anybody else talked about it.
I've never heard anybody talk about it. It's just weird. So there's that, and then the one I do know people talk about, because I still think about it, is Ratchet and Clank, which to this day is one of those ones that, like, the very first one of those that I played, and even like the second one was also great. They're all just great, but like was so, I don't know how to put it, because the fidelity was so high on that thing, where it was like the animation was on point, the voice acting was on point, the writing was hilarious, and then like
the game's personality was very.
Maybe that's what it was. It was like the first game that had a lot more silliness in it, while maintaining this really high, like shooter, third person shooter, and then action cinematic quality thing. And it was confusing, and I loved it. It was so good.
It's probably the first game that I played where it felt like, even though I had a lot of fun playing it, it felt like the developers probably had more fun making it than I had playing it. You know what I mean?
Like it oozed through, like how much fun they must have had putting that together. So I think about Ratchet and Clank a lot, and Azure Dreams a lot.
Yeah. But like also growing up, there was, again, like in my high school, mostly college time though, that was also when internet games were just fucking huge.
Like the Flash games.
All the Flash games, and
that's true. Yeah.
And so I think most of my gaming time, because also, and again, like Steam launched in 2004, right, with the Orange Box titles. So it launched with its own set of whatever it was, 5 or 6 titles or something. Over the next few years, they added like a couple hundred games, something like that. So there wasn't much for me to play, especially as a poor college student, but even if I wasn't a poor college student, like where was I going to go get games? They were just like, there wasn't. And so I spent most of my game playing time was just on random internet games. And like it was PopCap games. I played the shit out of it, Sand Aquarium.
Oh, it's Sand Aquarium. Yeah, that one's good.
So good. I love that one.
It's basically the cookie clicker of its day.
It was, yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So good. And like lots of like those weird stick figure kinds of games and like that kind of stuff.
Tons of shit on Newgrounds and like addictinggames.com,
Yeah.
Really
addictinggames.com. Yeah, that was that big one. Yeah, so it was just a lot of that. It was a lot of weird random stuff.
It was kind of an era of like, some tools for making games started kind of popping up, and also the internet was pretty new, and nobody was really thinking about like if there were people making games, for addictinggames.com or whatever, they weren't thinking like, this is my career, I'm going to monetize this, right? It was more of like just a bunch of hobbyists just throwing stuff onto the web, right? For people to play.
I know it did start making, like those web portals did start making good money. And so they started paying really well for those games. So you have, it's sort of like the indie movement again, where it was like people who were doing it essentially without any idea of the ability to make money from it. And then like it transforming into like a real business over that window of time.
Or like YouTube, right? Like early YouTube was just like, just random bullshit go, right? Yep. And some of it was like, it was hilarious, but you didn't have stuff like the clickbait thumbnails or the like, the kind of like formulaic reaction videos and stuff like it was just nobody knew what the fuck to do. So people just made stuff and kind of threw it out there.
Things hadn't coalesced on like the the ways that things could make money. Yeah, it was just all over the place.
Yeah, and also there weren't really any.
But the level of polish also was way lower than today.
It was way lower, but the fundamentals were always there, right? Like the games were super fun. It might have looked like shit or whatever. Yeah, and also because of like we've talked a lot about the problem of scale and volume, right? Where like on iOS or on Google Play, there's so many games coming out that they need these sophisticated algorithms to try to figure out how to surface things, and then like how they tune those algorithms changes what you see, right? Same thing goes with YouTube and everything else. But like back then, there wasn't that. Like there just wasn't enough stuff on the internet for people to even worry about trying to do shit like that, and so. It was a lot more browsable, right? So you'd find a lot of like hidden gems,
But also everything was more low effort. And so you also just like, you could just kind of see all of the new stuff and you would consume it and be done with it and then move on to the next new thing, right? Like nothing was trying to hold your attention forever. So it was a different kind of.
Yeah, because it didn't have a reason to, because they were probably not really making much money from doing it.
Yeah. But I think Itch is, I think, kind of like, and there are still like those web portals with all their, the small games and stuff, right? Like those things still exist. And then you've got Itch, right, which is kind of like the same idea, but more broad in terms of like the kinds of stuff that's on there. But those kinds of portals still exist, where if you just want to go like play a fuckload of weird, mostly small, weird, kind of low budget things, right? There are ways still to do that, and there's high budget things in those same places, right?
Yeah,
but like you can still do that. I think to me the problem is just that. I think once I saw a million games from like my youth, growing up, right? Then and there continue to be more and more games made every year. Not as in like there were 100 games made this year, also next year. Now there's 200 games, but as in like there were 100 games made last year, 1,000 this year, and and it's just been ramping up, right? Because it's been easier and easier to make games. It's more of a discipline that people can. The market's way bigger. It's something you can actually make money in eventually, and so the sheer volume of stuff has made it so that to me, it just isn't fun to go looking for games because there's too much. There's just way too much. And so now I'm just squarely in the camp of like, if I hear about a game because somebody else found it and thought it was good, right? Then that's basically what causes me to play games today.
It is interesting, right? If you think about like in your own sort of imagination, if you were like, I want to go buy a game, right? And you go to the store and there's like 10 games, right? Mm-hmm. And you can look and you're like, and you just pick the one that seems the best, right? Yep. And then you carry on your way. But if you were like, I want to go buy a game, and you go to a warehouse that has 10 million games in it, right? Yeah. Then you walk in and you'd be like, this is a job now. How the fuck do I figure out what to do? And you
gotta have a curator, right? You gotta have and it's kind of like, it's just a sad kind of show. It's not even that sad, right? Because it's just kind of what it is, because
it's just a thing.
It's still kind of, I think my opinion on the matter is that basically like kind of the same number of games that people can be aware of is kind of like been constant, in the sense of like at any given moment there can be like a few hundreds or a small number of thousands even of games that like people know about and are playing, right?
Yeah.
Man, I didn't even know about Baldur's Gate. It was in early access for like 3 years.
Yeah, it's because there's so many games. Yeah, there's so many.
I didn't know about it until a week after it launched, because so many people were posting about it in the game communities that I'm already in.
Yeah, if you look at the cadence of this now, though, it seems like there's like one a month now. That is like, it seems like a rough cadence as far as the one game, that like takes over the overall discourse for a bit, right? So it was like Helldivers in February, right? And you had Pal World right before that. Like there's Baldur's Gate took up a lot of space for a while, but like it does seem like there's sort of room for like one big, huge talked about thing that everyone kind of like the whole gaming, market kind of coalesces on for a brief window until just the diehards stay back and, continue playing.
Let me ask you this, because I think I know the answer, but I'm curious what you guys think. So the Barbie Oppenheimer phenomenon, right?
Yes.
Both films came out at the same time, and it turned into this kind of goof, and they were so different, but they both looked good, right? Yeah. They both looked like they had nailed the thing that they were trying to do, and people picked up on that, and so it turned into this kind of goofy idea of like, what if we go see both movies on the same, like just get tickets to both, see one, go like take a break, get some concessions, go see the other one, right? Kind of a hilarious, weird thing to do, because you can see 2 movies in a day. Yes. It's still kind of a lot, but you can do it.
Right? I mean, Barbie, I don't think it was 3 hours, but it was probably 2 hours, wasn't it?
It was a couple hours. Yeah. Yeah,
like
so you're gonna spend like 6 hours.
Oppenheimer's what, 3.5 hours or something? Yeah, so you're there for it's a long day.
So you can do that with movies, right?
But then you're
can
done.
Can you do that with games? Yeah, exactly. I don't think you can do that with games.
You can.
Games are high investment.
They're very high investment. Yeah, so if it was like 2 games so when you're talking about like in a given month, there's typically a game that kind of everybody's talking about, and it kind of sucks all the oxygen out of the room, mostly just because it's you can't really go all in on that game and play the shit out of some other game. There's just not enough time, right? It's a very different sort of medium. So
they're designed to be able to allow you to continue playing in the space for, I mean, especially nowadays, like the goal typically is essentially allow you to play endlessly, right? For the higher
but
end.
Certainly at least like 20 hours is like the low
20
minimum.
hours plus,
Right.
Yeah. Well, and you do stuff like, if you're, say, like a Twitter user, you'll subscribe to some like some content creators who are in that community. So if you started playing Helldivers, right, and you're like, I want to know more about what's going on, right, you'll follow the devs, and suddenly, or if you're on Reddit, you'll join that subreddit or whatever, and suddenly, sort of like your information diet also kind of gets taken over by conversations about that game for a while, which also drowns out conversations about other games, right? And so it's this kind of like self-reinforcing feedback loop that doesn't really happen as much in other media.
It fades off faster in other mediums, I think. And there's more room for simultaneous things to happen, versus like, I think in games, the attentional economy it operates very differently than something like movies or music. I mean,
it's just things soak up so much of your attention.
Yeah.
And so
it's
much
a
of your
deep
time.
well.
Yeah.
All right, let's get on the next question, which comes from Beekie Boppaboop, who says, in episode 458, which is pretty recent, just a few episodes ago. This was a fresh one. In episode 458, y'all talked about Snuppy Scuffle Rustling Buddies. So this was Scuffle Buddies or Snuppy Rustling, which one transformed into the other. And it made me wonder, is the Game Changer generic enough that you could make a card game with it? And given the market, would you ever make a card game in it? So, all right, so I'll answer this question because there's an element of understanding about what the Game Changer is that kind of comes into play here. So the reason we made the Game Changer is because we wanted to separate the game's data from the game's code. So when we think about data, it's basically just a bunch of information about what stuff is, right? So if you've got a blob of data that describes a weapon, right, then maybe that weapon needs a name. So the name is just a piece of data, right? Name, sword of stabbing, right? That's just some data. And then it's like, all right, well, how much damage does the sword do? Well, that's just another piece of data. Damage, 12.
Maybe you're going to get fancy. You're like, it has a min amount of damage and a max amount of damage. That's just 2 things you put in. Min damage, 3. Max damage, 8.
Right. So up until we had the Game Changer, all that information was baked into the code of the game project itself. So instead of having just sort of like a pile of data, there would be a script that would be like initialize weapons. And then, there would be some code where I would like run some functions to sort of like compose each weapon. But that meant that if Sam wanted to add a weapon to the game, he would have to know where that script is. He'd have to know that script is where weapons come from.
Got to be a programmer.
And he would have to use Git to commit it and know how to not break it, because you can type, it's code. You can type whatever you want. You can do whatever you want in code, right?
There's no guardrails and no help.
Yeah. And so when we made the Game Changer, we were like, okay, if we can separate the data from the code, then the Game Changer can exist as a data editing interface. So instead of having to go to that script, Sam could just like open the Game Changer and click a button. It's like new weapon, which would then create a new blob of data with some pre-populated stuff.
A sword-shaped blob of data. You know what I mean? Like it's got some opinions about what should be in it, and it's basically like, it's like a very fancy Google form. Is the easiest way to think about it. Instead of doing code for all these things, you're just like filling out a bunch of forms. And the forms are very specialized, right? In the sense that there's
and they have rules,
windows, they
right?
have rules. There's all sorts of stuff going on, but like just a bunch of forms.
Yeah. So if it's like, all right, Sam, what's the name of this sword? And he types 7, right? Then the Game Changer might be like, whoa, bro, you can't do numbers for names. It's got to be a string.
Also needs to be at least 2 characters. Come on. What is this?
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, how much damage does this sword do? And Sam is like -12, right? It's like, no, it's got to do at least 1 damage. That's That's the rule for the damage. So each field has rules, which means it's much harder to break. And then once Sam is done, playing around with the little sliders and editors and stuff to put this sword together, then he hits the commit button in the game changer, which then compiles all the game data together with including his new sword, and it uploads it to our server as just a complete blob of data describing all the stuff that exists in the game. So the thing though is that's just data. So the game changer can manipulate data in a nice interface all day long, but the data on its own is just a pile of numbers and words, right? So the other piece of it is the interpretation of the data. So that's what you could kind of think of as like a game engine or whatever, which is, so in the case of Crashlands 2, we've got this giant file. It's fucking huge now. It has 4,000 we just surpassed 4,000. We call them motes, which is just a blob of data, MOTE. So it just surpassed
mote. It's just like a little thing.
Yeah. So it has surpassed 4,000 motes of data describing all the different things in the game. And Crashlands 2 then consumes all 4,000 of those motes and converts them into useful actual like objects in the game and things that can function. And then it reads the data and all the stuff from those fields, and the code then actually uses that data to do stuff. So if you have a field, it's like what's the move speed of this creature, right? And so I have a creature object that I coded up that moves around and does stuff, but when it wants to know, hey, how fast do I move? It grabs that piece of data, right? It grabs that number, and that's how fast it's going to move. And so there's kind of like two pieces to it. There's the data part, which is what the game changer is for, and then there's the actual game itself, which uses the data to do stuff. So a big part of the challenge of like getting Crashlands 2 set up was that we had over a year of development without the game changer before we made the game changer, which meant that everything was hard coded, right? And so after we made the game changer, we had to update everything in the game to be able to use data like that, right? So it's now all done, and it's super, super flexible. And there was a point like a couple of weeks ago where we added 150 items to the game in a week, just like, and they weren't all complete in the sense that like they don't all have art and all that stuff, but mechanically, like they're in the game and you can use them and you can do stuff with them and get them. Yeah, it all works, right? Because again, it's just data, and the game is interpreting it. So like no new code had to be written for all those things to be added to the game, right? So when it comes to a card game, yeah, you could use the game changer to quote make a card game, but all the game changer would do would be allow you to describe a card game,
create the structured data that would then make it easy on the design side to make tweaks, to balance, to add new cards, dream up whatever you want. And then you'd still have the problem, at the start, especially, of having to initialize the gameplay, have the game be able to read that data and know what the fuck to do with what is a card, what is the cost of a card, what is damage coming from a card.
What's the user interface? How do you get cards?
Yeah.
So once you want to do the weird stuff, because if you think of like any of these fun, like Slay the Spire, right? Like one of these card games where there's lots of weird stuff, really weird stuff that happens where like there's certain kinds of
strange effects,
features that all kinds of stuff, right? And so the big part of the process is then figuring out which of those are describable in a general way, right? So that the person like working in the game changer adding data can add data without actually that meaning that new implementation has to happen, because it could just be instantly interpreted properly, right? And so then that balance then at that point of like what is general and then available in the game changer as a lever to pull, and like the more generally you can code stuff up where you can get cool specific outcomes, but with a general system, the more then a designer can come in and just like make content without having to impact game programming. But that's an extremely difficult design problem on the programming side, is to like develop mechanisms that allow you to do interesting, unique stuff using generalized systems, right? And so that's like so much of what SES time has gone into is like trying to figure out what are those? What is like the minimum set of like really general implementation details that allow us to do tons and tons of
I think
unique, weird stuff.
As far as like growing pains from the game changer coming online, like that was actually probably like one of the bigger ones, because one was just the transition fact, right? Like, the game was essentially in this weird half state where some part of the data was still embedded in the code. Some part had been kind of hoovered out into the structured data set in the game changer. But the weirdest thing was just kind of, I think, jointly wrapping our heads, because Seth and I ended up pairing a lot on that after some amount of time of just like, it was just so hard to do that it just kind of takes some extra, like multiple brains to be like, what if you talk about like a buff or an ability, what are you talking about? What are the important pieces of that? And then how do you think about and structure them such that you can do very specific things that you want to do, even though you're talking about it in this generalized way? I think we've gotten actually really good at that now, because like when we add new stuff now, new whole moat types, again, like a sword shaped form, when we add new shapes of these forms, then it's gone a lot faster these days than it used to be. Bang one of those out pretty quick. Got an understanding of how to think about this, how to think about that split.
Cool, because it moves the work into figuring out how do you design the system, right, to accommodate these like really general abstract concepts. And so it moves the work, where previously the way you would do the work is you'd be like, "Ooh, I want a thing that does this," and then go implement that thing, right? Specifically. And now the question is, okay, I want to do this swath of things that I think are really related to each other, right?
Right.
How can we represent
features.
all of those at the same time using one system and one data structure, right? That represents all of those concepts together, so that you can mix and match the subsets of those concepts for, unique expressions of it. And that's kind of like what programming is all about in the first place. It's about layers of abstraction and trying to move things towards more general solutions so that you can reuse them in lots of contexts, right? But it's a difficult balance game, because if you make things too abstract, they become basically useless or too hard to use, or both, right? If you make things too concrete, then they can only be used exactly one time, and now you don't get any reuse. And figuring out exactly like where to put the abstraction is basically what the challenge is, right? For programming in general, but then for this problem specifically, for really any design problem where part of the design is an implementation question, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's been weird to try to have to like reframe the way that I think about these sorts of things, because in the past, let's say like in Crashlands, you have like tools, right? So you've got your saw, you've got your pick, right? And those are categorized as tools, and they're set up in a very specific way in the code. And so then if Sam was like, hey, let's make a tool that like shoots you up in the air like a rocket and then like rains down a bunch of like harvest bombs that blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, well, the problem is like we've got bombs and we've got tools.
And never the twain shall meet.
Yep.
But those are different things. You can't like mix shit together, right? And because you'd often think about the function of a thing and then come up with a very specific kind of custom set of parameters. That's a very small set of things that you can edit to make new versions of that thing, right? But like in Crashlands 2 in the game changer, the chopper that you first get, the rachete that you first use for harvesting plants, which is kind of like the saw from the original game, is classified in the game changer just as a wieldable. Well, you know what else is a wieldable? Spears that you can throw, a flamethrower, a thing that turns you invisible. Yeah, because anything that you can like put into your hotbar or into your hand and use is a wieldable. And it turns out that like we tried to initially kind of separate them out categorically, but that created so many constraints, and they ended up just sort of converging together, where we kept wanting to kind of give interesting effects that kind of overlapped a lot, right? And so in a lot of cases, those generic, or even like critters versus creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, critters meaning the little guys that just kind of like run around for environmental spice,
butterflies or whatever.
Yeah. So there was a point where it's like we had the creatures put together in the game changer, so creatures could be described, and they could have AI, they can interact with the world, they can have things that they like and go to. They have combat abilities and all kinds of stuff. And then at one point, Sam was like, "Hey, can we get critters added to the game changer?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll see what I can do."
Yeah.
And as I started,
what's a critter, right?
Yeah, as I started thinking through it, I was like, well, it's basically everything is the same as a creature, except it just doesn't have combat abilities, right? And while I was kind of thinking through that, Sam, without me knowing, went ahead and sort of like drafted all of the critters using the creature schema.
Because I could.
because he could, and just like set their HP to like 5% of normal or something like that. And it turns out that worked.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have to come up with a new kind of a thing called a critter. It's just like, just use a creature and just leave out some stuff. So it can't fight because it has no
but it meant you needed to
abilities,
have the option in the data editor to basically to not have combat abilities on a thing, right?
Exactly.
So that's the trick about it, is to figure out like what does it mean for something to be a requirement versus not a requirement, versus like what's the range of allowed values for things, all that kind of stuff. Because like when you're coming to it as a programmer, you always are trying to specify as like tightly as possible because you're trying to prevent weird, unexpected bad stuff from happening, right? But from the design side, you want more flexibility there. So you want to be able to, because like you might come in and be like, well, yeah, a creature is something that attacks people. Therefore, to make sure that nobody makes a creature that can't attack people, because that would be a broken creature, like conceptually, right? But if somebody can't make one that doesn't attack anything, then now there's this whole domain of like kinds of things that could have existed that now can't. It would be more interesting if creatures just support conceptually the idea of not having combat, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have to figure out, okay, so as you expand the allowed range of outcomes of like what you're allowed to do with the data, the implementation gets more complicated because you don't get to assume very many things, right? And you have to kind of figure out like, what does it mean then if like this set of weird circumstances that I didn't think
will it work?
Should be allowed are actually allowed, right? Yeah, will it blend? Yeah. And you have to like work through all that stuff, and then you have to try to figure out like, okay, what's now. So the implementation gets harder, and you have to figure out what does it mean to check the validity of the data and like the design, right? Because if most of the time, a weapon does damage, right? But you didn't strictly require weapons to do damage because you're like, I don't know, there could be something weird that somebody could do with this if weapons don't require damage or whatever, right? Like, so now somebody can make something using the weapon schema, right? That actually isn't a weapon, but mostly behaves like one because that turned out to be useful for some reason, right? How do you know when like that is what happened versus somebody forgot to put damage on a weapon, right? And so you have this new like, and so as you add that flexibility in, the program is harder, checking validity gets harder. And so there's this constant push and pull, right, between like constrictive specification and expressive loose specification.
Yeah.
And the further you can move towards expressive and loose while still ensuring that you can like discover that something went wrong, that the implementation details make it so that thing technically can work and nothing bad happens, right, the better. But that's also where all the really hard stuff lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what's been really cool, sort of like as time passes, as we're using the game changer in Crashlands 2, it does have that kind of expansive feel to it now, because like if every new thing we want to do that we currently can't do requires us to look into the code and look into the game changer and think, okay, how would we want to describe this? So there was we didn't have projectiles in the game until last year.
Yeah, it was actually after we shot the announcement trailer. A few months after that is when we got projectiles.
Yeah.
But we had lots of discussions leading up to that point, trying to figure out how to think about it.
Yes.
Yeah, because we needed a way to have all kinds of really interesting projectile behaviors and outcomes and consequences in the game changer, right? So you can optionally be like, what does it look like? What happens when it hits this? What happens when it hits that?
Like a mortar?
Yeah, how do you describe its trajectory?
Like a bullet? Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it do like weird boomerang shit? I don't know.
Yeah. Does it spawn something when it hits the ground? So, like if you're throwing a trap, if you're deploying a trap, well, that's weird, right? Like it's a projectile that flies through the air and then turns into like a deployed trap on the ground.
So how do you describe that in the data, and how do you code a thing that allows that to be possible with a generic, like what does the generic system look like that does that?
Yeah. So there's a higher upfront cost where in the past, if we're like, we want a trap, right? They'd be like, okay, and I could code up that trap exactly as described.
Any change,
but then and traps that are exactly like it, right? So that like your generic thing is like, okay, we can change like the sprite or change the timing, or like there'd be a small set of things you can make where basically everything is the same, just with a few
but in particular, then also specifically, Seth would have to be the one to go make any iterative changes.
Yeah.
Which if you're talking about a game with hundreds of items, becomes very, very costly. Right?
Yeah. So there's this slow start where you're like, okay, we don't have traps and we can't have traps for a week because we got to spend this week figuring out what the fuck is a trap, and whatever we decide, how's that going to be expanded upon later, or are these decisions going to constrain us too much later? How do we find that kind of that middle ground? And then once we've got the ability to describe traps in the game changer, then we go into the code and come up with all the different ways that the game can handle that data and make it work, right? And once you've got that, then adding more stuff to traps or like adding more capabilities or whatever becomes faster and faster and faster and easier. And every new idea you have that you currently can't do just becomes yet another field in the game changer. And the thing just keeps expanding
to all the rest of the traps, which is also the difference, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
a good example is being able to just put like a random scaling on a thing, right? Maybe having a thing in the world and you're like, oh, it'd be cool if there was just some variation in it. Can I get some random scaling? You know, again, before, if every object was independent, just doing its own thing, Seth would be like, no, because I have to go do that 700 times for all the things that currently exist, versus being like, yes, I added a field to the form. Now you can just go fucking copy and paste it 6 times or like, you know, however many times you need to, and then you're committed and it's done. It takes minutes.
Yeah. So expanding the game in terms of capabilities and content has been this kind of exponential curve where you think about like at the very beginning, it's basically a flat line, right? Mm-hmm. Where like barely anything is happening for a long time. But like I was saying earlier, we had a point where we added like 150 something items to the game in a week because we hit a point where the game changer could do 99% of all the things that we needed to do mechanically in the game. We could describe all these items as intended and they would all work as intended. It's all hooked up. And then like that last 1% is every now and then we'll be like, oh, actually we want this item to do this, but we can't do that yet. But since everything else is already set up, adding that one little extra field is now trivial 20 minutes, you know, compared to a week. Right. And so it's doing that stuff that we've kind of intended where like it has that kind of exponential ramp up. But yeah, those early days of, especially since the early days were rebuilding the game that had already been made to use this new data, like those early days were real.
Yeah, I don't know what making a wholly new thing in the context of the game changer will be like if we'll use it.
It'll be a lot faster.
Yeah, because you also have the risk of like, because you want to prototype stuff as quickly as you can, right? And so you do kind of have that balance of like, you don't necessarily want to build infrastructure for a thing that you're not sure about. So there's always that kind of.
Well, I think the nice thing about, I think that problem actually isn't there on the game changer side, because as you're iterating and prototyping, what it allows you to do is basically go from like, oh, I think it should work like this, to then having the schemas and be able to put the data in.
Right.
Like it solves that problem in a way that is, because that's the beauty of having it be independent or relatively independent of the implementation details, right? Because then you can basically really quickly get all the data in place that represents that thing. Like, hey, even if at some point you throw all that data away because you're like,
if you're like, hey, we're making a card game. It took us a week to come up with like how exactly to structure card related data.
Yeah, you have your draft one of the card schema, right? That describes card, and then you go implement it and see what happens.
Yeah, we put in 30 cards in fucking 2 days or something.
Yeah,
Seth finishes coding up how exactly they do the stuff that's in there over a couple of days, and then you can actually test like a full on game.
It makes it a lot easier to explore a prototype space because
and it's built for scale. So it's not like we wouldn't use it in a game jam.
No,
because
time.
A game jam, you don't have enough time to make.
You don't have time to be like, what is a buff though? You know?
Yeah. And like, what would it mean for us to have 300 buffs? It's like, well, you can't fucking do that because you just don't have enough time. Right. So it really is. I would
still argue though that you still could and should though, because again, like, because you're thinking of it in terms of like, if you're thinking about the game changer in terms of production, yeah, that's true, because you got to really think through everything really carefully before you start to build it and all that kind of stuff, right? But you're thinking in terms of like a jam context, all it is doing is helping you deliver data structures. That's it. That represent content, right? And you already had the general systems are already in place to go from having like the described data to having access to it in the game. That's a solved problem, which means that all it's doing for you is you saying like, okay, here's the data I think we want to use. And then now it's in there, right? It's there now. You can now start plugging stuff in.
But that's not actually what it is, right? Because when I'm coding something, I shape the data differently than how it's shaped in the game changer, because the game changer is an editor. So how the data is composed and what it looks like and how it's described is meant for somebody who doesn't have to care about the code behind the scenes, right? It's like what sort of intuitively makes sense as you're building a weapon or whatever. But what ends up happening in code is going to look very different. And there's this what we call the hydration step, which is take all that data from the game changer and convert it into something that's much more useful for how the game needs to use that info. And a big challenge in especially early on in building out the game changer is learning how to take the time to compose easily editable data that makes sense to somebody coming from the outside, but still have that data set up in a way that once hydrated
isn't problematic for you.
Isn't problematic. Yeah. So the problem is like it's actually really time consuming and expensive to figure out how to
design the
representation. So like the only reason you do that is so that people other than the programmer can work on it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a game jam and you've got 20 people on your team, then maybe that would be worthwhile.
But if you're in a game jam and you got 20 people on your team, you're already doing it wrong. I gotta be honest.
Yeah, that's the rap.
Yeah. but that would be the challenge, right? It's like, can we make a game with 20 people? And if so, we'd have to use the game changer. All right, how do we do that, right? But yeah, it really, I would say it probably like the game changer basically like quadruples probably the time required to get the first version of a thing in, you know? And then it's still like twice as long to get the second version of a thing in, but then it's like 5% as long to get every subsequent thing, right? So if you're gonna be adding only like 3 different weapons to your game because it's a jam game, then the game changer just is not gonna be worth it, right? So
that's on the one hand, that's fair, but also I think it implies like, there's probably some kinds of improvements to be made along those aspects of it, right? Along how do you go from being like, I want data that looks like this to getting it represented in a way that the game changer can interpret.
Oh, yeah.
And how do you go from getting then that thing to knowing what that actually looks like in game so you can use it in the code?
There's lots of improvements, but it largely just comes down to it's a design problem because the game changer is an editor and you want to design the data in a way that's easy to visually understand, right?
Yeah.
Which is not the same problem you're dealing with when you're just like
coding.
What would be the best way, like the most optimized way or efficient way to represent this data in code, right? There's, point being like with the game changer, we can make a card game with it. We can make whatever with it, but all the game changer is going to let us do is describe stuff in that game. We would still have to code up the game to interpret the data, if that makes sense. So very good question.
Yeah, but I guess in terms of like the sort of intent of that question, if you have something that's really content heavy,
yes,
but where the details of the content, requires a lot of balancing and that kind of thing, a lot of tweaks, and where the implementation, and you can find a way to make the implementation details really general and abstract based on that system. And a card game is a good example of that. Like you can definitely conceive of ways you could be like, I can represent the entire concept of a card with like with a handful of data structures, right? Mm-hmm. And so as Seth is saying, fuckloads of upfront work for to figure out what that is to capture all the kinds of things you want to be able to do. But unlike lots of unlike say like Crashlands 2, where you're trying to represent an entire world and like how things interact in like in a simulated environment, and like and the complexity level of representation is really high because you're trying to represent so many very distinct kinds of concepts that also interrelate. But for something like a card game, you have a lot more, or I guess you're not trying to reflect reality, right? So you can kind of choose.
The structures are already abstract, right? They're more abstract, exactly, and they're actually more independent
and easier to generalize. And
and a card game would be fast, actually, very fast.
Yeah, way faster than something like Crashlands 2 with system like Game Changer.
And because of how, like Adam was saying, because of the complexity of the simulation in Crashlands 2, there's some really weird stuff that you wouldn't really think about. But for example, in the Game Changer, if you want to ask just a question like, how much damage does this weapon do? You can't know that by looking at the Game Changer. Yeah. Because we don't just type 100 for the damage that something does. The damage is automatically determined at a baseline. It's computed by like what level is the weapon? Like, is this something the player is using or is it something an enemy is using? Because that's different, right? Like if everything does the same, like if you kill enemies as fast as they kill you, that feels bad, right? So we have all these, like we have a separate panel in the Game Changer.
But also you want to pull balance levers to have like a hard mode where that is true, right? And
exactly. Yeah. So we have a separate panel in the Game Changer where we can set kind of like global information about how things balance against each other. So it's like, you're going to hit enemies like for this, like it's going to take you like this many seconds of continuous damage on average to defeat an enemy, but it'll take it'll take them this many seconds to kill you on average. And
which I think is also an important note to your whole thing of like, we don't just plug in 100 or whatever, right? It's because the numbers don't, like, amount of damage is actually meaningless. Like, it feels
the
like
numbers,
it's not a real thing, right? What actually matters is how the player experiences that, which, as I said, is over time. That's the actual thing that tells a player, like, was this hard or not? Was how long did it take actually, like, to accomplish some goal is the real measure of difficulty.
Yeah. If something kills you really fast, you're like, it did too much damage, right? Which is true. Right. But like if you had more health and it did the same amount of damage, then it wouldn't be doing right. So balance is all relative. And so we actually can't see fixed static numbers for things like health or damage or whatever in the Game Changer. Those actually get computed when we hydrate the data. How fast does this sword swing? Right. What level is this sword? Does it do extra damage against certain kinds of things? You know, all of that kind of stuff. And so, you know, part of the design is figuring out how to represent that stuff in a way that's still intuitive for people to edit in the Game Changer, but where you can hide all these extra layers of stuff from them so that they don't have to worry about it. Right. It's pretty tough, but yeah, I feel like a card game probably wouldn't be that tough to make. Great. I don't think we'd make one, but we could.
We could.
Yeah. All right, well, that's all the time we have for this week. Very good questions. Thank you very much. I would like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost it up the charts and help it have a successful launch. So we'd appreciate that. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.